this. Okay, now we're gonna be live in like 2 seconds.
Great.
Thank you.
Is it live?
All right. I
I'm scared to say because it's
just the minimum.
So now we just need to mute. Big computer.
Yep. So,
Okay, sorry.
Yep.
Sorry. All right.
Okay.
Now ready.
Now we're live. I'll call this meeting of the June 24th Planning Commission to order at 4:35. And the first item is, are there any citizens to be heard? If you want to raise your hand or unmute. Seeing none. Very quickly, any ex parte communications or disclosures from anybody? Okay, I'm going to announce who's in attendance. Mary, Aaron, Obi, and Jerry, and I believe Tony and Steve are not in attendance, and everybody else is in the room. Approval of the minutes from June 10th. Motions. Make a motion, we approve.
I wasn't there.
Yes.
I did happen to read over.
And any discussion? And I do have a question here. Do we probably need 4 affirmative votes to make sure that these minutes pass, just like we would on anything else? So you can vote if you weren't here, just reminding people. Okay, any discussion? Seeing none, how many vote to approve the minutes? That's all 4 people. Okay, Trish, yes, you're up. County Commission report.
So just a couple things from the commission the other night. We did open the public comment period on the PUDs, which were San Juan and why am I forgetting the other one? Lance. Thank you very much. So those are open. And I just want to acknowledge Elisa. I'm going to do a really good job not to get upset. You've just done an amazing job. You know, you've led us through general plan update, update to land use code, the future land use planning, King Creek development, Thompson Springs replat. I put all these things down because, you know, it's huge what you've accomplished. And some are in the works, but I think you've put us in really good hands, and I think we're moving. It's going to be great. You've done everything with grace and style and professionalism and inclusiveness, and that goes a long ways. And I've learned a lot from you, so I'm trying to learn to keep my cool. And I watch her, I'm like, how does she do that? And so thank you so much for all that you've done, and we just wish the very best for you. Thank you so much. That's very, very kind. Yeah. I got you a little plant. Sorry, one more thing to move. Oh, no, I love that. I love that. Thank you. I haven't had it working in a really long time. That's it for me.
I'll only say amen to all of that. Very, very, very good working with you.
Thank you so much. And I just have, I've said this before, but it's been an honor working, you know, under you as a commission and planning commission and the county commissioners. It's just amazing to have folks that are intelligent, kind, and actually really care about the community. And I know that sometimes you don't get that credit, and I see it though. I see it just by working closely with you all. So I hope people see it in the
So then we have a question here. Do we want to do the debrief about the consultants now?
We could go into that. That would be
Okay.
fine with me. I mean, that's probably fresh on people's
Okay.
minds before
that's-
we get bogged down with the land use
Yeah.
code stuff.
Small change in the agenda, but if no one disagrees, then we'll make that discussion. And Jerry, you suggested it. I'll let you go
I did.
first.
Well, I thought it would be a good idea because Obi and I were together for an hour with the consultants, and since we didn't do everybody in the same room at the same time, which is probably better because we wouldn't have all had as much time to talk to them, we may have had different things that we took from the meetings. So anyway, but I have to say that I like the degree of attention that they paid to Obi's and my comments. It seemed like we spent a lot of time talking about the node in the South Highway 191, which was really appropriate because that's where most of the action has to take place anyways. It seemed that we spent a bit of time talking about where we think the community at large is with the future land use plan and willingness to do things like see density increases in certain areas. And my feedback to them was that I thought the community in general was at a point where there's recognition that we have a problem we need to solve. And I thought we had good feedback in the meetings, and we'd probably be able to make the changes that we're planning. So that was really the gist of what I gathered from it. And I just wondered, if we could hear from the others.
Actually, Aaron and I were together too.
Well, good. So why don't I'll add what I think we also talked about. I mean, they asked interesting questions, and a piece of the density was, yes, people would probably take increases in density if it was for affordable housing or some, kind of good cause. They're probably more willing to say, okay, I'll take that density. Talked a bit about urban growth and making sure that the levels of service somehow got into the land use code so that we actually have a plan for where we actually think density ought to increase. My wife made me bring up the issue of fire and a fire map. And they actually reacted pretty positively to that. It's interesting that it'd be great to have Tony here and get his views of it. But basically, fire danger might also guide where you want to grow and put any kind of density. Might be as important as us thinking about other kinds of zoning issues for where kind of where you want to expand because you think, density ought to be concentrated a little closer to the city or maybe in a node, but an actual fire danger map might also guide how you grow. And I'm trying to remember the interesting question he asked at the very end that may come.
What are you afraid of? What do you fear?
Oh,
That's what he asked us.
and we'll want to get yours and also Trish. Absolutely. I think the one that was interesting, he said, so what do you think the community will look like in 10 years? Will it be all kind of, a rich community or what will it be like? So that was an interesting question. My own personal answer was, I think there are too many of these outdoor activities like bikes and camping and hiking and stuff for it to end up purely kind of a high-end resort community, but there'll always, of course, be that pressure because it's a great place to live and sit and watch and drive around too. So anyway, you took notes, I'm sure.
I get through a lot of these, so I kind of expected all the same questions. I've always been the one asking and never the one answering though. I got a different take when I was talking with them because when we first started doing update. And then, of course, all the other updates that I've sat through. The very first one we had, our mantra at that point was keep the county rural. And it was because we were afraid that it was going to be taken over by housing at that point, and that was 1996. So I brought that up, and then of course every one of them was a different one. One was sustainability. I can't remember all of them. There were 5 in the last few years, and I reminded them that there was a time when I had a group of people show up in my office to talk to us about what they were in fear of. And their fear was, and it made sense to me because these were people I knew, people who had lived here a long time, and they had their little paradise, and their paradise was an acre or a 5-acre parcel, and they didn't want that taken away from them. And so I reminded them that needed to happen too. And I had no problem with density in the valley. I was always thinking that what would happen first is the lower end of the valley would just put a 1/2-acre lots, half acre zoning, and then move, just like you guys discussed, and move that density towards the city, denser and denser and denser, because that's where it's going to go. We also talked about nodes for commercial, because that's obviously going to need to happen. But he did ask us about a commercial area that might go in out the valley somewhere. That was kind of interesting to me to figure out where they would put that under the circumstances. But I think if we have the roads that go in along the side of the highway, there could easily be another area for, and we talked about this for as many years as I can remember, smaller commercial uses like hairdressers and ice cream shops, and places for kids to go get penny candy. No such thing. And it's a place where we could walk. Since I've lived here, walking has been less and less. There was always somebody walking somewhere in this county, in the city. But I lived in the city, so it's kind of a little bit more easier for me to say that. I don't see that like I did for years. My kids all walk to and from school, and I don't see that very often. And then when I do, I think, oh my God, what about that? Where was that little kid? Why is he walking to school? So those are the things that we chatted a little bit about, and they were very receptive of it. I think Aaron brought up a lot about the commercial node and the denser housing. So.
Yeah, I tried to give them a perspective of like what they're definitely tapped into what's going on, like housing ideas, and I'm like tried to be like, this is what different. I tried to give them a real good perspective of like, remember how we did this thing about like there's these little population humps around like the 65, 75, and then the 40. And then but we're not getting the younger people in, and we're coming up with these housing ideas. And I was saying about what I was trying to be, it was like, I see that the younger people that are here, what they're looking for in housing, what can make it appealing to them, and what their values are. And, we actually talked about Arroyo a lot, because I feel like a lot of my friends my age and younger are either in Arroyo Crossing, the Bonita subdivision, or in some kind of community rebuilds house, or they got in when like the market was still like affordable for like working people. And so I kind of really tried to, it was good because me and Mary kind of, we don't have exactly the same views and different generational things on there, but I'm trying to be like I kind of tried to stress like, I think everybody I also tried to bring in like how there's a disconnect, and it's just because of how things are between like active transportation and how how things are built out, or how density is going in the county. Like I kind of am like, I kind of was like, I think one thing that really stuck with me, I was like, I think everybody in Arroyo Crossing, like a lot of people I know, don't necessarily want to be driving everywhere. They would really like to like walk places. They would really actually like to live downtown, more in the downtown city vibe, but you just can't afford it. So I'm like, how can we like make it downtown to them? You know, and that was kind of my thought on that. And it's like, you know, I definitely hear Mary's point on that too. Also, I'm just kind of like, we've kind of gotten like the one thing I saw that we didn't talk about. I mean, we just talked about the valley. I mean, do we have any other? You know, there's always like Thompson and Cisco, and it's just kind of like, we don't talk about those kind of places. But I'm like, I don't know, is there any like ticking time bombs? Like, you know, oh, I wish 50 years ago the Planning Commission in 2024 addressed this issue. I don't know. Like, I just really wonder if we're like sleep on the wheel on some of that stuff. It's like, oh yeah, here's potential going in. I just thought it was funny they focus on that, which is good. But I tried to put in that perspective of things.
I always like it when people remind me that the drive from Thompson is about as quick as the drive from Castle Valley. Now, they don't have any water, but Trish knows all about their water.
Yeah, I met with, and right before I was there, and Moab Valley Fire was represented, so that was great. So I would assume that was a part of that discussion, just to kind of verify that.
Yeah, that's right. Brandon was there.
Yeah, just that interface, and do we want to be building in those interfaces? Yeah, and putting our our firefighters at risk, and spreading out those resources to those areas. So I thought I appreciate you having Moab Valley Fire there. I was there with Evan and Kevin, and so it was a good mix. I mean, I think the three of us are pretty similar, so maybe it wasn't the variety pack that they were looking for, but I brought up their questions were like, what do you fear? And I brought up the rural. For me, rural is very important. The part of the valley, I've always lived in the valley since I moved here, or I should say the southern end of the valley, and there is importance to me to keep some rural character. But maybe that those voices are few and far between. I don't know. Or is it important for as a community to retain that? Just a few cows and pigs, and it's important to me, and my neighbors, I think. And then we brought up water. Water was a big part of our discussion, and not really having a firm grasp on how much water we have, knowing that we're constantly monitoring and evaluating that, and also knowing that San Juan County is quite aggressive in their development, and what will that mean for our county. And so I think those were the big things. Of course, we did the same thing here. We talked a lot about if we're going to have density, where do we want that density to be, or we'd like to see it going towards a fourth floor workforce housing. So I thought the good schools were really good. I think it's really great where they're coming from, because I think they have a firm understanding of where we sit, right? If you're from Heber, or you're from, well, they call it the Wasatch Back, and in general, they have a very firm understanding of where we sit. The growth there is exploding, just like ours. Yeah, they're in a little different place in the sense they probably have a little bit more water than us, but I thought they were great.
I felt like I kind of tried to, for a few minutes, tried to explain like how a local views the town, because they've all come here. They've all visited, and a visitor's experience is like completely different. And I was kind of be like, hey, this is where like the golf course is. This is Rimville. Like, try to view how a local tries to see that, because I could tell they're all like, oh, I've been to Moab, but I'm like, have you?
They did ask us where our secret places were.
Yeah,
I
think they're great.
Yeah,
I
think they're going to do a great job. I do. I feel like they have their finger on the pulse of the challenges, and just having the experience of the Wasatch Back, and seeing that those areas are a little bit further along than Moab is in the stage of all of that growth and boom and tourism. And so I think that there's been, for their perspective, they've had the learning experience of going through that. And so even if, you know, things haven't worked out maybe as perfect as everybody wanted in those towns, it's never going to be perfect, but at least there's some lessons to be had for our areas.
Aaron, you brought up something that I hadn't thought of before. I should have, but you were talking about Arroyo Crossing and your friends that live there and how what they really want to do is live downtown. But the next best thing, since that's unaffordable, is to have some downtown services near where they live. And I wonder from a future land use planning standpoint, you know, what we could do to, we talked about the node at Spanish Trail too, and that's kind of all in the same general area. I wonder what we should do to accommodate that.
And the other thing, you know, we're working on, but we've been working on it now, is that it's a bike path, obviously.
Yeah,
But you know, it's a work in progress.
it's only money away, Trish.
Right.
Well, I think that is a really interesting concept about, or not concept, but point to be bringing up, because I've had the same thought about Arroyo Crossing and the juxtaposition of Arroyo Crossing and this Resource Boulevard area right here, where you actually do have some general business zoning. And then there's a bunch of multifamily, which I've been approached by a representative of this landowner or their heirs, about how they actually would like it to be not multifamily and they wanted to go back to commercial, and that at some point along in the history, and maybe Mary will know, that this was rezoned, but originally it was general business. But I think it's a really interesting area and could be potentially another node, because you have this is kind of my neighborhood. I live right in here, and I feel like this could even be an interesting situation where you could provide some open space too as part of a master plan kind of commercial development, where you would have maybe some areas of community open space that could be shared. Because right now Arroyo is pretty built out. There's not. I was surprised to realize myself that so far there's not like a little playground or a park or anything for some of the young families that are moving in there with their kids. It would be a great benefit to kind of think of this more holistically, maybe. So I think that's a great thing to be talking about. Yeah, well, great. I'm so happy that it all worked out in terms of the back-to-back, setting up those meetings and having that time with the consultants. And I think they did say at the end of the day that they were super pleased with all of the input that they were getting. It was very helpful for them. And so we have, well, going forward, the planning staff, they've set up these bi-weekly meetings with planning staff. So just to continue checking in and making progress. And so we'll let you know what the next steps are on their end, what they're going to be doing. So
Sounds good.
Okay, I guess it's time to go to the Luke.
yes. Okay, so I presented these slides at the commission meeting, this last commission meeting, but I thought that I would just go over this with you all, because there's been a little bit of progress in terms of narrowing down our scope and coming up with a timeline for the land use code updates. Oops, sorry. And so we, screen is always so, there we go. Come up with a timeline for accomplishing the land use code updates by August 18th, which is when the 180 days moratorium would be up. So it's a pretty fast time, crunch to try to get this all done. But I, a lot of these things have been in the works for a while. I've already got drafts of the red line copies of the code in progress. And I would say that it was a difficult time when we had our associate planner leave, and right at the same time this period of 180 days kind of kicked in, and I was a little concerned at the time that we weren't going to be able to make a ton of progress, but we've been kind of chugging away and getting some of these updates drafted. So June 26th, I would hope to get most of these into legal review for their timeline. I think that they usually like 30 days, but we're going to try to work with them on that. And July 8th would be the Planning Commission public hearing. July 16th would be a County Commission public hearing, when that public hearing would open, and then they would hopefully vote on the land use code updates on July 24th, although there could be delay in case there's disagreement about what the land use code updates are and if we need to go back to the drawing board on any of those. But ideally, we would have the July 24th is when the actual public hearing ends. That's when public comment would be due. And then August 6th is the actual commission meeting where the action item would be on the agenda for approval. So as far as the use table changes, I really had to kind of take a step back and instead of getting too far in the weeds with this, because there are so many things that we probably would want to change, but could have much bigger impacts than we're wanting to, take on right now in terms of analyzing those impacts and spending the time, because it's important not to make sweeping changes in a kind of a fast-paced fashion. So my take on this is just, I looked at all of the comments that you all put in there, and I kind of took the feedback from the commission and our staff, and I pulled out the things that seemed very obvious that we would want to change. So this is the current list right here. And you can kind of, this is all up on Grand County Connect, so you can kind of review these on your own. And if you have anything that's like glaring that you think is not something you would vote for or wouldn't agree with, you could definitely let me know. But I think these are all things that we've talked about pretty, I don't know, but we've had a lot of consensus on these. And then in terms of the changes to residential uses that are allowed in commercial districts, right now in neighborhood commercial, we don't allow residential dwellings except for upper story. So we would want to go ahead and allow all residential dwelling types and not change the density, but just allow that you could have a duplex or a townhome, as well as a small scale commercial business on the property, instead of it having to be that traditional mixed use, which a lot of times it's actually very challenging for builders. I found that people get the idea of a mixed use type of construction or idea, and then they immediately find out, like from the building code, that you have to put in so much fire suppression, like within the residential units, because it's a commercial building, and so it becomes very cost prohibitive. And I think that's why we're not seeing a lot of these go in. But if you could allow commercial and residential where there's separate buildings, then I think that could be a more possibility. And then with highway commercial, we didn't get consensus. There was some debate about whether or not we should be removing completely removing 18 units per acre in highway commercial. So the compromise that I came up with was just to reduce it to the 5 units per acre, which is consistent with the other zoning districts, which all allow 5 units per acre in commercial. And I think that might be kind of just a stopgap right now to try to ensure that our commercial districts are being used for commercial uses and we're not necessarily putting a lot of housing right next to our, like right in the same property as our really high intensity uses, sorry. And then within that zone, we would also be preserving the ability for people to get accessory employee housing, which is five RV sites per principal commercial use. And then we would also be preserving the ability for multifamily and upper story residential in that zone.
What would the limits be for the upper story? Would that still be limited to 5 units per acre?
Right.
I wonder if that makes sense. Or if we could go with higher density.
If it was, yeah, if there was an upper story and then you could have higher density.
If you had 2 upper stories.
Right, because the max height in that zone is 35 feet. So theoretically, you could go 3 stories. Yeah,
But you'd get over 5 really quickly.
that's true. If you were stacking them. That's something to think about. I would say that we shouldn't shy away from, if a builder is able to pull it off to do that traditional mixed use where you have a retail or commercial on the ground level and then some multifamily up top, then I don't see a problem with that.
I think it helps resolve the issue we have.
Right.
I think if it's consistent with the commercial zoning, why not a lot more housing?
Right. Yeah, I think we could work with that.
I must be I'm a little bit confused. I mean, the first one says it's 5 units per acre. Okay, yeah. You could have multifamily because you could have much acreage.
Mm-hmm.
And then you do a PUD probably, right? You might concentrate it.
Could do a PUD for sure and get a density bonus, yeah. And I think that these, like, again, with the future land use plan, density bonuses will be offered through that, through future land use code iterations. And so I think it's yet to be seen what the recommendations will be for highway commercial in relation to multifamily. But I do think that upper story is pretty compatible, And usually that's a little bit self-regulating. Like a developer is not going to put in housing on top of some kind of use that's like not compatible because they wouldn't want to. That would just shoot themselves in the foot in terms of marketability and selling the units. So they would want to have whatever that ground level commercial is. They would want it to be like complementary to the residents.
They'd want to be able to rent that out for sure. Yeah.
And building codes, that's another thing the building code gets into. There's only certain kind of businesses you can build above.
Right.
Obviously don't want a cabinet shop underneath.
Yeah.
Or a bar.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it could, but
A
they worry more about fire at those kind of places.
A bakery maybe.
Bakery, there you go, bakery. Something that smells good, or a butcher shop like the old days. Go to New York. And I think I don't know if any of you've been to Daybreak, but I remember when that went in, that was like every planner's, oh my gosh, it's the most beautiful thing, greatest wonderful thing that ever happened. And a lot of people moved there because of that. And there is a lot of that along their main streets. When you go, that there's the dentist office and the restaurants and all the little shops, and then above them is residential. And then they also have the houses, which are separated out. They have condos and that are separated out. But the downtown part of that little Daybreak, have you been there? You've been to Daybreak, haven't you?
I don't know that I have.
If you ever go to Salt Lake, just turn off 1400, whatever that is, go straight down.
Okay.
You can go right to it. And it's got a great big beautiful hospital down there. But that's how they did theirs.
Yeah.
And the streets are small, you can't park on the streets.
Right.
Parking seemed to be inside, which is something else that everybody always talked about, is if you build your residential, your commercial this way, park on the insides. And that's also something I think we've talked about in planning for years.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In fact, the city thought about doing it on their main street for a while. Yeah, so I think above, residence is above commercial or great.
I
We
do
just
too.
don't have developers that are,
You
that
don't have a
have
lot, it's not
they
as
don't wanna
common
do
to
it.
see them be built, but I don't think we should, disallow it.
I don't
Yeah.
either. I think it's great. It's a great idea.
Right.
And it's something we've talked about for a lot of years and just nobody ever really come up with a plan that would work. There was a couple of areas, like the area that you're talking about went to high density. There were, because those lots are they're big lots. And I think somebody came in and was talking about it, but it just never come to fruition. I don't know if it's and honestly, the building code does have a big barrier there between, kind of like any condo that you build, you have to make sure that the fire rating is all around every room. Every door,
Exactly.
everything.
Yeah.
And depending on what's under, and there's limited to what can be on the bottom floor, of course. So I think it's a great idea. I hope somebody comes up with something and it brings us a nice little area over there by what you're talking about. So,
Some of the business park does have that. It's, you know, they have residential above it, but it's all the sprinkler
Right.
things.
Sprinklers.
Put in
Yeah.
a lot of sprinkler systems over there.
well, they do that in condos anyway. You have to
Yeah.
have sprinkler systems in all the condos. So it's not like it's something not that they're
Right.
not used to. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally agree. Okay, well, that's really good feedback on that one. We'll work that into the update somehow.
And
I have another question though, when I
So-
was going through this stuff.
Yeah.
What happens if we start making non-conforming uses?
Yes, so that's a whole thing. And that's why I was like, we need to be careful about what we're changing in the use table. There are gonna be some non-conforming uses that come out of these changes. But that's why they have to really mean something. Like if it's really gotta be a strong rationale to want to change the use table because you do
And
have,
a
you
way
have
to
consequences like that.
bring that history to it so that something doesn't happen down the road, because non-conforming uses are essentially the property owner's responsibility to show you, you show me why you're not conforming.
Right.
I think there needs to be some kind of if there's too many of them, that the planning office or maybe even the recorder's office could have a place where they could record.
Where we keep the track of them. Yeah.
so that it doesn't turn into a big issue, because
Well, one of
you've
the
seen
ways
it happening.
that's going to start happening actually is with the business licensing. We've taken that more in terms of checking. Well, we're changing the process a little bit so that first of all, the property owner or the business owner comes to planning and zoning first. We've always tried to get people to do that, but it was it's overlooked. Some people would just decide to go to all the other approving bodies and come to us last, and then we would have to tell them
I know.
that use is not allowed, and that's unfortunate. So we've worked with the clerk's office to bring the business licenses online, like we talked about, and so that process will start with us, so we can say from the very beginning, this is
way to
allowed or it's
document
not
all of
allowed, or you're going to need a conditional use permit. And then the other big thing is nobody has ever, the county did not in years past check with, I don't think any other signing entity, including planning and zoning, were had to sign off on the renewal.
Yeah, I know.
So renewals would just roll over, they would pay their fee, and nobody would ever check, oh, did something change in the code, or is this still a legal use? And so we are going to be starting to do that, where we're going to actually be signing off on renewals. And so there is going to be a whole slew of probably finding out that there's non-conforming uses that, the code had changed over the years. And so that's going to be a whole thing. But if the use is not expanding and they're vested under that, whenever they got approved, then it can continue as long as they're not expanding it or what else?
Just expansion, the intensity.
Yeah,
Increasing the intensity on the area.
right.
So the land.
Yeah. or if it didn't lapse, if they haven't let the business lapse for over 6 months or something like that, it's.
I was also, when you're,
Yeah.
changing the RG to 40 acres or whatever that's happening right there.
Yeah, so that's a
Yeah.
more tricky, that's definitely
Yeah,
a tricky.
because you've got a
one.
lot
And
of
I-
lots out there that are only 5 acres.
I feel like there's almost gonna be a need to go a little, if we're gonna do that, there's gonna be a need to actually go a little bit further and go ahead and adopt the country residential zoning district, which was proposed in the, it is proposed in the future land use plan. That would be the 5 units per acre, or no, sorry, 5 acre minimum lot size. And that would be where we would apply it in certain areas, like Thompson has a bunch of range grazing and there, but that's gonna, a lot of that area is gonna get rezoned anyway, because it's so, it was just kind of arbitrary, the zoning that was put out there.
But
So-
the mountain too, I mean, the mountain properties, and that's county. And there's a lot of 5 acre parcels up there that people own and have a house on. or a cabin.
Yeah.
And, could they expand their house? What happens if they wanted to add an extra room and suddenly you can't because you're non-conforming use?
Right, and so I think. we
Yeah,
need
and
to
I
look
think
at
you're on the
that.
right track about maybe taking the area, like maybe leaving the mountainside out of it, and leaving it out to the valley, or, there's gotta be a way to do that. Castle Valley, even, 5 acre parcels all over out there.
Yeah, that's true. They have,
And
luckily they have their own zoning,
Yeah,
but
they do now, but at the time they were RG.
right.
But even surrounding them, there's some 5 acre parcels surrounding them that are still RG.
Yeah, I think we could look at the zoning map and figure out if it's something that's feasible to actually parse out the existing 5 acre parcels and just assign that to country residential and make that the new range and grazing 5 acre minimum, and then the other range and resource, that 20 acre minimum would apply to those larger tracts of land.
It was just something I was
That
thinking
is
about
like, I
when
mean,
was
it's weird because this is all stuff that's already been planned and it would be implemented through the land use chapter, the general plan, and then subsequent land use code updates. So it makes me a little bit nervous to do these things out of step from that process.
I know.
But
Because right now that's not even a general plan area. In our current general plan, that wouldn't fit in. Some of the things that are changing in this, in our
Right.
current general plan.
that's true. Right.
Lisa, I had one more question on the previous page. Which is that one.
This one?
No, that one right there.
Okay.
So the highway commercial that we're talking about, in here, we're saying reduce to 5 acre units per acre to be consistent with the other commercial zoning districts. But we talked about doing some other things that would allow us to do higher density. So if we were to do some of those other things like a density bonus or a PUD or something like that, what would that result in? Would we be back up to 18 units per acre, or?
It depends on how it shakes out with the future land use plan and that map that
That's kind of
designates.
why I wanted to have this conversation, because from a standpoint of the LUCs, these changes, we've really got this meeting and that's it, right? Then we have discussion in the next one. And I would just hate to see an opportunity for some usable higher density housing disappear,
Right. Yeah, that has been the concern that's been expressed for sure.
especially
Yeah.
with this. So I guess that's my question is, do we really want to do the reduction, or how do we want to handle that so we don't necessarily lose that potential housing in that area?
In the interim, until we can get the density
Yeah.
bonus
And-
in place.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you could have it just the way it is, but I guess now the density bonuses don't apply to highway commercial. Isn't that right? Small lot residential and,
Oh, that's true. The
So,
current
but-
PUD density bonus is it's kind of it's also sort of an interim stopgap measure that we put into place because it was something that was simple to implement in terms of a land use code change, but ultimately our our bigger picture, like implementing new zoning districts or overlay districts that are 18 or 35 units per acre would all come out of the future land use plan. And that's, you know, that's ideally the way this would happen.
So then, I guess my question would be, if we make this change in land use code, that does not prevent us from doing something different in the future land use plan.
No, it doesn't at all. And
And I would say my concerns are gone.
okay. What it does is basically, so it would reduce the density for now. It's kind of a temporary measure. And then when the future land use plan is adopted and land use code updates come out of that, where you establish the density bonus incentives for these various areas that we designated on the map. And one of those areas could potentially be in highway commercial as upper story. And then you would have the benefit of having a deed restriction for a certain amount of units for locals or primary residency or workforce, however that pans out.
I think the other thing is there was a note in here somewhere about maybe we want to have a South 191 highway commercial. So that'd be a part of the future land use plan, and we could incorporate some additional things in there too.
Right, yeah, so that is another complicated thing that was added to the list. I'll go back down and see if it's on here. I thought I put
Well,
it.
you can go back to working in order. That's-
Okay. Okay, so we'll come to that.
Sorry,
If
throw
I
you out of
didn't,
whack
I
here.
might have updated this, but I'm not sure. Anyway, so the other things that we have in the works here, obviously the ADU section that's been pending for over a year. That I've gone back into that draft that we basically the attorney's office had sent it back, saying that it needed revisions back, when we had brought it through planning commission as a public hearing. So that is getting fixed, and I hope to bring that forward because it really does need to get wrapped up. And then, so then here we have the increasing the minimum lot size for range and grazing to 20 acres. Although I did note down here that we have these other implementing factors that would come through the future land use plan. So I do feel like we need to be careful, like Mary said, with creating non-conforming lots out in range and grazing. So I think we will look at the current 5-acre lots that are out there and figure out if there's a way to preserve those as 5-acre lots instead of 20. So there's that. And then establishing an application expiration, that's definitely needed. That'll help. It'll be very helpful. We also have a lot of revisions to the site plan applicability and application submittal requirements. These have been quite lacking for ever since I've been on board, and we run into a lot of problems trying to process applications for site plan for commercial uses and multifamily, where we're just not getting. There's no requirement for a lot of submittal things that we need in order to review the application. So we end up asking for things that aren't in the code, and that just becomes problematic. Very much so. And then revising the PUD section. This is just a kind of a clerical thing. It's legal, but we need to change the definition for actively employed households to refer to Article 10, and part of the updates that will be happening in this period of time will be the Article 10 definitions. There's a big update for that as well that's underway. I've just listed a few of those things. There's a whole bunch. We've actually had a draft that was started in 2022, and I found that, and it's so it's already pretty much it's almost complete to the point where we can send it to legal. Let's see, update multiple sections in the code pertaining to trail easements for new development. That's mostly for clarification. And then we're still looking into the water source protection overlay and whether or not that's just a simple update, and I did read through, OB, you gave me that draft language that you had written up, and I think that was pretty close to what it could be. So I'll just, of course, need to get it vetted through legal, and yeah, I think it could be something we could implement this time around. Consider replacing highway commercial. Oh yeah, this is the one. So yeah, this is brought up by one of the commissioners. I feel like I somewhat understand the intention is basically to address the fact that we have highway commercial all along the South 191 corridor, but yet we also have it in random places out in the outlying areas of the county, like up at Crescent Junction, and even a few areas out on the North 191 corridor. And I think the concern is that those are such different areas that they should really be separated out into their own distinct zones. And so whether it's creating a South Highway 191 zoning district, or maybe potentially, instead of messing with highway commercial in that south area, maybe we just look at the zoning up in the northern part of the county and make sure that that is appropriate for what it should be. No, there's actually a few there's some parcels out along the corridor on 191 north going up to I-70 that are highway commercial. And then Cisco has a heavy industrial,
Yeah.
which was
That's
a,
light industrial.
which could be a red flag as well.
And small residential.
Yeah.
It needs work.
The Cisco area had that heavy industrial because they're gonna build an incinerator or something out there.
Oh,
And that happened, but nothing ever happened.
right.
And then somebody come in and wanted to do a train turnaround area, so we had to rewrite that whole code for that. And Cisco's always been kind of the heavy industrial area. And I'll give you some history to why we have highway commercial. Before we had highway commercials defined, we had C1, C2, and C3. Those properties out there, the C3 turned into highway commercial. And C3 was out there. And that's what it was. It was a C3 property that changed to highway commercials, and the HC had to go there. And that's how we get some weird highway commercials in areas that we shouldn't have highway commercial.
Right.
So it was just it was a change of name, not
Mhm.
necessarily a change of zone. And that happened in a myriad of places out in the valley. And when we did the big code update, when we changed everything from C1, C2, C3, whatever they called it, and changed the names so that they were more accentuated what we were doing on the ground. Like general
Right.
commercial, highway commercial. Stuff. So that's why we have weird highway commercial and weird highway areas.
Yeah. I mean, most of the zoning out along the North 191 corridor is resort special, which came out of the scenic protection overlay, or the small area plan that was up there in that whole kind of planning effort. And so my perspective would be, wouldn't it just be better for that, if that's what is intended for that corridor, should it just all be resort special, or is there a reason to break it up and have different? I don't know.
You're gonna have to figure out, my guess would be that, what each one of those zone districts are and what they're allowed to have in them. If they're pretty much the same, then yeah, change them. But if they're not, there's reasons why. C3 is what it was, highway commercial is what it is. And the corridor plan for the North Corridor, that's when all those new zone changes went through, those RC zones, RCRS, whatever they all are.
Okay.
That's when that went through. That actually happened when we collaborated with the city. When they took the area in from the River Bridge in and took that city part, that code was already written. It was already part of they were part of our general plan. They just incorporated that whole code right to what they did when the city annexed all that in. It's interesting. So those, they do need to be updated, obviously, because things have changed. But that's how those are. So I'd be real careful with what's in each one of those zones. Trying to figure out how to make them all the same. Obviously, people own the land, and they've owned the land for a long time. They're aware of what they have.
Sure.
They're not paying attention. They're going to come screaming at you
Oh, yeah.
Not you, but
I
you.
know, me, definitely. Yeah.
That I
know,
was
feel the
told and I had and now I don't have, and so you just need to be
Yeah,
careful.
no, we need to be very careful. And that's why I feel like all of these changes are much better handled through the long range planning process, a comprehensive plan.
You're right.
Where you're doing a general plan and then taking that forward. And there's a lot of noticing and a lot of like input from the community and developers and property owners. So that's more of our kind of traditional planning style of approaching these changes. So yeah, I think that that where the commissioner is coming from that would like to see these changes is that there's a fear that there's some outlying zone that is, you know, just a sleeper, like you were talking about, Aaron, that's just waiting to, that we haven't paid attention to, that could be a similar King Creek thing. And I don't know what that would be necessarily. I mean, in terms of the scale of what we've just recently seen. I mean, I could think of some smaller, potentially like undesirable development that could happen, but that's such a subjective thing, you know,
And
to
it will
judge
surprise you.
whether or not.
I mean, gosh, there are things happened out there all the time that I want that shouldn't have ever happened, but it did because the zoning was allowed. So,
Just an aside, that commissioner ought to tell us what those places are. I remember
Yeah.
the comment, but even if there's 40 of them and that commissioner only knows 10 of them, it would be very nice to know what they were.
well, and things change. I mean, like I said, if you go back to look at all the old general plans, which you should have somewhere there, they might be in the clerk's vault, and review what happened, you know, 3 of them ago, it's changed so much because everything happens. New people move in. Things are needing to happen that we didn't even know existed at the time.
Right.
And I mean, I look at even some of the stuff that are currently in the land use code. I remember drawing up one of the maps, and it's still in here. And it's just you just don't know. You don't know everything. You can't know everything. But it's so hard not to want to know what will happen if this happens.
Right, and that's where I think that the visioning and like trying to,
And public hearings, you know, the public needs to be aware of everything that's going on, or you're going to get caught up in that. So, because that was always our biggest problem too. You know, we have to make sure that the public knows this is going to happen because they're going to come right into your office and say, "Hey, how come I didn't know that?" And I felt that way even when they changed zoning in the city. How come I didn't know that? I worked down the street from them. I should know that, and I didn't know that. I mean, I suddenly have a parcel of land in my neighborhood that can have 8 houses on it. Before, when I moved in, could only have 4.
yeah,
So that kind of stuff happens, and people need to be aware of it.
I agree, yeah. That's where, yeah, I do feel like this process that we're going through now, you know, that's where that public engagement happens, and as best as we can do to get the word out and have people provide input and feedback. We're never going to get everybody. There's still going to be property owners that will say, I never heard about that, but at least we know we tried to put the information out there. So that's what we're doing. But I do feel like, to your point, Mary, like when you say how we could have never imagined these things, you know, back 30 years ago. Well, that's why I feel like it's so important now to really try to envision what could happen in 30 years and grapple with that now and put a plan in place for what you would like to see, because otherwise it just happens by the whim of, you know, our systems, our developers create the ordinances and zoning.
So they come in and say, I want this, make it work. And you think, I can't make it work. You want to make it work, you go do all the work.
If there's not a solid plan in the gap of that, in that vacuum, developers will just, you know, pave the way. And so I think it's, for a small rural growing area, it's so important to really take charge of that. So, yeah, that's my little speech. Okay, so let's see. I don't think there's much here. Yeah, so the last slide was just to kind of talk about what maybe would be going into the second round that I had to take out for now because just for time, the essence of time and getting this update done. So looking at the floodplain section and aligning that with our ordinance for floodplain regulation, and then establishing a grading permit process, a temporary permit process, and then there's a whole bunch of actually some other amendments that were somewhat minor that didn't make it into the first cut. So we would be looking at a whole second round of updates at some point, hopefully this year.
Are these gonna be, will they be a part of the general plan? I mean, are we gonna have areas of changes that the general plan's not gonna match?
They should definitely, whatever changes are happening out of this process, I believe we would definitely want to incorporate some description or rationale in the general plan.
has-
Land use.
that has that
That's a
section
really
in
good idea. Yeah, to make sure they align, for sure.
It gives you that credibility
Yes.
for the change.
Right. Yeah, so I had hoped to present tonight some of the red line versions of the code, but I didn't get those prepared in time. They're not quite presentable. But I will, I think what we should probably do is share those with you when they go to legal, so that we can, if you have any red flags that you see that you were like, oh, I didn't think that was going to be in there, or something that we missed, we can still have time to make that change before it comes to you as a public hearing. Yeah. All right, any other questions?
Okay, and then are these future considerations down here where we will do the interviews next week? Not
Yes,
next
so
week, next meeting?
I don't think I've heard back from the applicant. I reached out to see if she would be able to come to the next meeting. I'm just checking right now to see if she did actually get back to me. She might. A lot of people are out of town right now. I know that, so she might be out of town. No, I haven't gotten any confirmation yet. So if it is July 8th, that would be great. But I also let her know there's no deadline, you know, so we did send her the interview questions and asked if she would submit those in writing back, and then during the interview she would present of the select few that we said.
So is there only one applicant?
So far, yeah, there's
Okay.
only one.
The application's still open though, huh?
It is, yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I feel like we should probably put it in the papers again, because I'm pretty sure the ads that we had in are it's probably been a week since they've expired, so we'll get those circulated again. Yeah, I know it's hard to find.
Well,
people are all so busy.
I was at a meeting, somebody said, you're on the planning commission. I hear there's a spot open. Can I apply? And I said, yes, I think you can still apply. Then after she went away, I kind of tapped her on the shoulder and said, you should apply immediately. This was a week or so ago. But I did, it was at a meeting. I did not know the person.
Oh,
I just thought, getting more than one applicant is kind of a good idea.
it is.
Well, maybe I'll try to buttonhole somebody.
And then we have, what else do we have?
Oh, and I have at the very end, I took my notes down in a funny way, code enforcement focused items and direction. So that's that code enforcement type of meeting we have.
Yes, so we once again, we are kind of wanting to recalibrate what code enforcement's role is in terms of specific things, and enforcing specific things that are a little bit tricky, such as the illegal camping require land use code section, and then what else? There's you know, there's always the continuing conversation about how much we enforce the junk cleanup, you know, and all of that. But there's probably a couple of other related code enforcement topics that we would just want to get your feedback from the planning commission on. The commission probably will be weighing in, right?
Yeah, I think the whole, this was somewhat inspired by me, sorry to say, but yeah, we met, we all met, and I thought we had a really good meeting. And then I reached out, I think the end objective was to have a workshop, and I think that could be a workshop with everybody, the planning and county commission. And so Brandon gave me kind of a rough outline of his ideas, and then I sent those on to, I was trying to remember who I sent them on to.
I don't think it was to me.
It wasn't to you. I think it was maybe to
It
Alicia
might have been-
Oliver.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And like pick a date and so she knows, but it probably, in my guess, wouldn't be the next planning commission county commission, because we are not having another one until,
It's just 16th, I think.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so my guess is we'll probably have a fairly long agenda since we're skipping a meeting.
Right.
So it is kind of in the purview to have a workshop and really just a general discussion, like, yeah, where do we want to go? And I think the great thing about the conversation we had, which Mikhail brought up, was this idea of health and safety. And I think that's such a great, right, when you get down to the simplicity of it, you know, we want people to be safe, and we want to make sure that they're living in healthy environments. And so I thought that was really great. And so is it that, you know, we are enforcing those things, but other things we're just trying to provide education? Anyways, I think it'd be a great, you know, just discussion topic for the two commissions.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was mostly just trying to focus on where there would be support.
Right.
And also the inevitable discussion of everybody still needs more help.
Right. Right.
That's a much bigger
That's
topic.
great.
And I thought it was really interesting. I mean, the question of how proactive do you want to be
Right.
versus reactive. I thought that was a great discussion. And when, you know, how strictly do you want to enforce rules? I mean, that's the thing. And of course, the lack of actual staff to do it. So then maybe you have to pick and choose maybe health and safety issues first.
Right.
So it's very interesting discussion.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. It was really good. Yeah. So hopefully people didn't feel I was like trying to, I think it's something we talked about like a year ago. I can't even remember.
Yeah.
And it was like, yeah, it was probably time to revisit.
It is.
Where are
Well,
we
we had the transition between Josh and Brandon. And so
Right.
I think just having the staff turnover, you know, there's been a little bit of time now where Brandon's up to speed on things and he's doing a great job. And now it is a good time to revisit, because I think it was towards the end of when Josh was here that we were starting to pick up, like get more focused on what code enforcement should be and what that should all look like in terms of certain things like illegal camping. And so now I think it's perfect timing to bring that all back up and recalibrate. And I think it's super helpful for code compliance officer Brandon to have a clear picture of what his
What am I supposed to be doing?
duties
Yeah, right.
are, so it's not just make his job easier.
And I think it's really great that the city always goes first as far as like the landscape ordinance, and now, you know, they're like really aggressively, you know, they've got, I don't know how many code enforcement officers, but they've got quite a few and they're pretty aggressive. So I think we get to stand back and watch and see how that goes. And then we get to come, is that wrong to say that? We get to come in. That's not working out for them.
I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned between both of, like, I think that the city does that sometimes
Sure.
for the county.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Stuff too.
Yeah.
So I think if we both kind of, I think it's a good relationship. Probably happen that way. Yeah.
So one thing that impacts code enforcement, and it's something we talked about before, is the Dark Skies Initiative. And,
That's a big one.
yeah, it is.
And that's in flux right now too.
Yeah, that's not on the list here.
I know,
know.
because it's a bigger update. It's like a total overhaul of that section.
And
It's not
yeah,
like a little
Jared,
tweak.
a little bit we talked about, it's like, well, could we start, you know, with education and maybe also, you know, education as far as what are some resources that people have to come into compliance, right?
I think that's the right way to get started on it is voluntary compliance. If we could find a way to get people to do that voluntarily
Yes.
and get 80 or 90% of the way there, that'd make the rest of it a lot easier.
The education piece is very key. We talked about that a lot when I was at the city. We were adopting that mostly because we didn't want people going, oh look, I'm gonna make my twinkle lights dark sky compliant. See all the cans I put on them? And watching everybody go, oh, please don't catch things on fire. So sort of teaching like what that actually looks like. Do it yourself can only go so far.
I don't think there are any other items. Is there a motion to